Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where technology meets real-world problems. And I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we're going to be diving into the critical intersection between cybersecurity and business metrics. And my guest today is Joseph Carson, and he's the Chief Security Scientist at a company called Delinea. And they bring immense expertise to an urgent conversation. For example, did you know that according to their global CISO research, a staggering 89% of respondents have faced negative impacts due to a simple lack of alignment between cybersecurity and the business? Now, together today, I want to explore the key metrics to balance both of these worlds and also understand how to prioritise critical assets. So from technical insights to business outcomes, we'll uncover the path to strategic success and economic growth. And I think that's something we don't talk about enough. We always put these in separate boxes, whereas the two really do impact one another. So if you're a business leader, somebody that works in IT, a cybersecurity, a CISO, whoever you are, you're going to find value in this conversation. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Tallinn in Estonia, where Joseph is waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here. And for me, my name is Joseph Carson, and I'm the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at a company called Delinea. And we focus around helping protect privileged access for many of the world's organizations. I myself am based in Tallinn, Estonia. I've been here for over 20 years now. And my career is close to 30 years in the industry. So hopefully I have a wealth of knowledge to provide to the audience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. I'm a little bit envious of your life in Estonia. I had a fantastic time there a few months back. And one of the things that made you stand out to me, I wanted to get you on the podcast, was this holistic metrics approach. And considering the significant number of businesses impacted by a lack of alignment between cybersecurity and their business metrics, for everyone listening, how do you propose business approach this alignment more holistically?
Absolutely. One of the things is we've spent too much time putting cybersecurity and security in general in a silo, that it was really historically focused at protecting computer systems. And that's not the case anymore. With organizations becoming much more digitalized, much more dependent on technology, we really need to start moving away from, honestly, cybersecurity, and we need to start moving towards business security, how it aligns and how it basically breaks down those silos. And how, today, cybersecurity is basically protecting the business, from financial risk and financial exposures and business exposures. And we really need to make that alignment better. So I believe that the future is all about doing that transition from cybersecurity to business security.
So in your view then, how can businesses maintain that balance between those technical metrics like the number of contained attacks and business-centric metrics such as economic value or revenue growth? Because it's quite a tricky balance, I would imagine.
It is indeed. And I think that's the problem, is too much time we spend on evaluating and measuring the success of the tools themselves, and not enough time assessing how those tools protect the business. And that's what we really need to do transformation from, is rather than measuring how successful the deployment was, how many machines are reporting in and getting updates, we really need to get to the point was, well, how does that transition impact the business? And it was a realization, actually, quite a few years ago, I did a pen test on a power station. And that was the moment of realization. That was a redefining moment in my career even. It changed my viewpoint on what I do. And during the conversation, it was myself and the CISO were actually having a budgetary, meeting with the board, and the board denied the budget increase. And they simply said was that we showed fear and scare tactics, but we didn't really show how we're actually providing a return on investment to the business. How are we helping the business be more successful? How are we helping the employees do better at their job? And that was a realization that ultimately, we actually had to convert that into an ROI. We had to convert everything we do into what are we doing to help the company be successful? And that's something we need to transform into. We need to really understand about how am I making the employee's job better? How am I making their life, how am I making them be successful in their job and meeting their metrics? And this ultimately means we really need to have a serious transformation in how we measure success with security, to really being, how does this align to the business goals and metrics? So ultimately, looking at, well, How much, the CFO would ultimately give me the maths for this particular one was, what's the cost of doing nothing versus the cost of doing something, and what does that look like? And the business is willing to spend, money to protect a revenue source. And it really means that we have to look at, business let's say, resources as services. What does all of those look like together in an individual service? And what's that service providing? And then how does security protect that service? And if that service is down, what's the impact directly to the business? That's where you start looking at a much more value approach, is that this is how much we're protecting. Every time that the service is up and running, this is how much they actually, the solution or the security strategy is protecting revenue. And that's how we start looking at things. It's the protector of the service and revenue, rather than just the success of the tools themselves.
And I think historically, the C-suite have famously had problems understanding the value of cybersecurity. They know the importance of it, but hey, it's something that might happen, not that will happen. But I think thankfully that is changing now, because most businesses accept that it's got to happen at some point. And many business leaders, though, still view cybersecurity as a technical concern. So how can cybersecurity professionals better communicate that business value of those initiatives and get that coveted seat at the exec table?
That's a great question. And one of the most important things is we've been struggling to translate cybersecurity to the executive board for many years, because we've always been taking that technical approach. And just like I mentioned with that board meeting with the CISO, we took a very technical approach for that board meeting, rather than speaking the same language as the board, which they're ultimately looking at, how do we make sure we reduce risk? How do we protect the services? How do we keep the business going? How do we add value to our shareholders and to our employees and customers? And that's ultimately where we need to have that basically, language translation. And the CISO and the BISO, the rise of the BISO is also an important area there, because they're the real important communicators, and they have to have that ability to translate technical jargon into executive board understanding. And this is really where that skill set really needs to accelerate into communication, improving that communication. So ultimately, absolutely the board have got to the point where they're better understanding the value of cybersecurity, because many organizations have seen so many incidents over the past few years, specifically ransomware, that has really, caused devastation for many organizations from a financial impact. So absolutely, executive boards are starting to take, make, attention and, listen to these incidents and understand about, they can't stop, they can't not do anything, and they must take action. So definitely organizations, I believe, are, the boards are starting to listen more to the CISOs and the technical side of things, but we need to be better at translating that into business value. And this is something that will help in that transformation from cybersecurity to business security. So definitely, I think that we really need to get into the point where we need much more forward knowledge about how they measure and how they speak at the board level. And that will allow you to get more time at the table. And one of the best values I heard recently, I attended one of these quantifying risk workshops. And one of the things that a seasoned board member had mentioned to me is that if I'm going to do a presentation to the board, he simply said, we typically start with this building journey, here's the challenges and here's these things we need to do. And ultimately, here's the summary. And he simply said to me, turn it around, start with the summary and let them ask you questions. And that's how you get that interactive conversation going. Start with where you want to be and what you need, rather than actually building up to that point. And then the rest of the slides will typically become supporting narrative to getting there. And that was something that was really interesting, because the boards have very little time for you. And if you go straight to the point, then basically they'll start asking the right questions, and you can help guide them to the needs. And this is something we need to get better at. And I think it's something of a journey. I think it's something that will take some time, but it is the path that we need to go on to really getting to the point where it is we're protecting business services and not just computer equipment anymore, and that's how we need to see ourselves.
100% with you on that, and I suspect we've set off a few light bulb moments with both CISOs and business leaders listening around the world. And for anybody listening, how should businesses better integrate those cybersecurity metrics into their overarching strategic goals, and ultimately help ensure that cybersecurity isn't just a support function, but an enabler of business growth? Because that's where we need to get to, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why a lot of organizations have also had that rise of the BISO, the Business Information Security Officer. And that's that person who sits in the business functions, because many large organizations, they have many different lines of business. And it's really difficult for a CISO to manage all of that across all of those different divisions. So that's why a BISO has become important. But one thing I find as well is that, we need to get into where we're breaking down those silos, as you mentioned. And this really means that we need to have people that what I call as cyber ambassadors or let's say, mentors within each of those business divisions. So, go to people who we can ask questions into what's their measurements for success? How can we help them? How can we be more enablers to support them in their doing their tasks and jobs, rather than being the policy enforcer or the passive saying, no, you can't do this. This is how you do it because this is the more secure way. We really have to get into the point of asking them, how can we make it be successful with putting, the safety guardrails in place, rather than being the team of no. And that really comes down to those cyber ambassadors and mentors, because those are really that link between understanding the business objectives and the security, needs and the reduction of that risk. So for me, definitely the BISO is an important role in organizations. If they are very large, they have very siloed divisions, that's something they should consider. But definitely getting ambassadors and mentors in each of those business functions will provide good liaisons. And one of the things that I found in the past is sometimes the best people that makes those roles is people who have been victims of cybercrime in the past, because then they know the impact as well. They know how it can be devastating and how the risk can be. So sometimes they're the better people at communicating it to their peers and to other parts of the organizations. And it also becomes, they become your champion within those business areas as well. And they can also help you, define what's the best way that you can communicate to them as well, because they understand the language that they speak. So this is really important to make sure. And this means that rather than, security, being historically a support function, focus on technology, we then become a more business, function that focuses on technology and people. Because ultimately, most cyber attacks target the human side of things. Technology is, ultimately, the goal of the impact, but ultimately the path to get there is through people. And we have to also become better at actually communicating and driving that knowledge through the human side of things. And that also becomes an important role of this transformation to business security.
And given the vast digital landscapes of many organizations, are there any insights you can share in how to better identify and prioritize the most critical assets and systems that require protection? I appreciate it is a pretty big question, but any insights around that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. It's one thing that many organizations have struggled with in the past, because they have so many assets and there may be a huge amounts of business functions and services. What it really comes down to is, first of all, know your business. Where does most of the revenue come from? And I learned a very valuable lesson many years ago in Estonia. In Estonia, I was at the time going and having this conversation about, software-defined networks. We need to define everything by software. Software is basically, the function, data is the access, and really aligning it. And they said, no, you're wrong. They said, it's all about services. All of the software all line up into an individual service. Is it the tech service? Is it the financial service? Is it, the human, talent service? It all aligns to a service. And there's a number of typical, functions or software within that, service that's been provided. And then you have to look at it, well, how does that align to the business? And this really means that you have to know your business. The next side of things is then understand about, the assets and having a good inventory of all of the things in that service that make it function. What's the critical parts of it? What's the things where you don't have any potential fault, or, let's say redundancy built in place so it's resilient. And then that will help you understand about, well, what's the prioritization that you need to follow? So these are some of the things, the fundamentals is you need to do a proper, good risk assessment to understand about, well, which are the vital controls or vital areas in the business, what are the services, and how does it apply to the business? Then once you have that understanding, it allows you then to take a phased approach into protecting the most critical assets first, and then we'll get down to the ones that are less critical. And this ultimately means that, and that's a continuous thing, is the business is always evolving, always adapting, always getting new technology, always doing cloud migrations, always doing digital transformations. So it's always important that you look at this from a continuous process and not something that is a checkbox one and done. So this is something you'll always be following. And it's always good, and it's important, again, to have those good relationships with the business because they can give you good knowledge about when projects or changes are going to happen. So you can already become part of them rather than security becoming almost like an afterthought or like an after effect. And this is something that we need to get into. So for me, absolutely, know your assets, know the business. You look at it from a risk approach and a prioritization, and that will help you at least map a path out to where you need to get started.
Just to highlight some of the tangible impacts of misalignment, can you shed a little light on the tangible impact businesses face when cybersecurity and business metrics are not in harmony? Because you've been in this game a long time. I expect you've got a few war stories under your belt. So beyond data, what does misalignment look like on the ground?
Absolutely. Misalignment looks like, a lot of organizations sometimes think about, security is an afterthought. It's something you do later. And I've seen even recent incidents. We've seen some cloud providers who were doing, cloud migrations. And all of a sudden, this is one of the most, let's say, vulnerable times is during those migrations is when potentially security might not be applied. It might be misconfigured. It might be the old, versions deployed. And it really leaves organizations exposed and can ultimately lead to massive, ransomware attacks. So this is really important when you approach this is that when you don't have it aligned, it tends to be security is always bolted on after. It's always, it's the last thing that gets added. And this gives a massive opportunity for attackers to find those weaknesses and find those vulnerables and take advantage of them. So this is really, where we have this whole discussion about shifting left, moving security more to the left, more to the beginning. And it ultimately, in the end, if you do it that way, it's much cheaper because adding security later can definitely have an impact because it can be more costly. You might find that, you may have not chosen the right solution to begin with. And therefore, you might have to do a rip and replace in order to get to where you really need to be from a secure standpoint. So this is some things, and it can really drive up costs for a lot of decision making that is very short term. And this is where basically having that proper alignment can mean that you'll have the right solution chosen from the beginning. You can have the right strategy, and also making sure that the cost of security being applied is not more than what it should be. And I definitely see that many organizations they need to make sure they're having those discussions at the beginning and not too late. And that's why it's really important to make sure that those security leaders do have seats at the table so they know what's going on beforehand. It's also really important to have good relationships, and this is also gets into the debate. Right, sometimes who should the CISO report into? It's always that big discussion. And some feel it's the CEO, some feel it should be directly to the board. But ultimately, because the CIO and the CISO almost speak the same language, as long as they have autonomy, as long as that person has the ability, to make sure that security is being taken serious, that's where that strong relationship can be, is between the CIO and the CISO. And that will definitely help make sure there's better alignment as well, especially when changes are happening or new innovations are happening within the organization.
Another big term we're hearing a lot of at the moment, especially in IT teams that don't want to be seen as the people that just keep the lights on, is the term business enabler, especially around the idea that cybersecurity can actually drive business outcomes. So can you share some success stories or maybe even scenarios where well-aligned cybersecurity efforts directly facilitated business success? Because I think that's where the vision that a lot of people are going to be wanting to go after.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even just coming to some of the ways that Estonia here measures how they apply security and how it helps actually reduce some of the kind of impacts or waste is basically making it more effective for people to do their job. And one of those ways that Estonia does it is reducing wasted time and having a very, let's say, easier to use, privilege access and access control systems and digital identity here really reduce a significant amount of wasted time. And that's where they become business enablers. That's where actually you can get money back in order to invest in more things, is by reducing that wasted time. And if you look here in Estonia, from that strategy that Estonia has taken, it's estimated that approximately 5 days per GDP per year is saved per citizen because of their strategic approach to this whole digital identity, digital society with security at the core. And that, you calculate into 2.5 billion in savings. So you think about, a means of where that simply has a direct value to the economy, that's significant. And businesses can also learn from that same method, is when you do security right, it can accelerate access and it can speed it up, people having to be able to make better, faster, quicker, and safer decisions. And that can reduce wasted time. But it's ultimately, at the end of the day, and when I always look at it, we always talk about, what's the most valuable, things on this earth. And we always talk about data being new, most valuable thing. Now it's all about algorithms and AI, and we talk about cryptocurrencies as well. But ultimately, the most valuable thing in this earth is time. And that's the most valuable thing. We all have a finite, limited amount of it. There's no infinity time for humans. And we have to use our time wisely. And where security can help reduce wasted time, that's a massive value. That's significant amount, where we can actually put that time back into better uses, and actually much more business value. And for me, we all have the finite amount of time, and any solution that reduces that, especially security, is something of great value. And that's what we really should be looking at, is how can we reduce that wasted time and add more enjoyment back into our workplace.
Well, before I let you go, I'm now going to ask you to take a peek into the virtual crystal ball here, because with the rapid evolution of both business and cyber landscapes, how do you envision the future of cybersecurity metrics? Where do we go from here? And are there any emerging metrics or areas that decision makers you think should be paying attention to?
Absolutely. I think one of the trending areas that I've seen is all about looking at business outcome metrics or business focused metrics, which means that really, ultimately when you're making decisions as the final decision will be basically a value, how much this is actually helping drive more value to the business. And it has multiple ways of doing it. You can either do it that it's actually protecting revenue, or it's going to be reducing wasted time, or it's going to be actually helping you accelerate different innovations. And I think those are some of the three key areas that we will start actually building into any solution or any security decision making. You can't be actually spending more on security than the value of the asset or resource that you're protecting. So that's what's really important is that what is the value of what it is you're protecting. And something, as I mentioned previously, the CFO at the power station, he simply said that, let's say, the power station is generating 100 million per year, or, 100 million even, per day in some cases. That's ultimately, he's willing to spend about 10% of that revenue to protect it. About maybe, even the bigger value, maybe even up as close to 30%. So that's really where you can actually understand about, one is your budgetary plus potential that you can get to protect that revenue source. And ultimately, it allows you to make sure that you're actually having a direct impact to protecting the value. So these are the things we have to really understand is what is the value of the asset and resource we're protecting? How much potential budget would be available to protect it? And then driving into, are you protecting money? Are you protecting people? Are you protecting, reducing wasted time? And this ultimately will be the trend. And these are what we've known as business-driven outcome, or business-driven, metrics, which really allows you to apply direct, so we're no longer just a cost center. We're actually a business, driver, for revenue. And I'll get into these accelerations when you look at sometimes solutions that are being deployed, that sometimes they take a long time. And sometimes with the right security strategy, you can actually make it much faster. You can help those innovative solutions, that might not have, let's say, the security controls, like things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, the right access controls. If you've got security solutions that provide consistency for those, it can help actually fasten the deployment and the success of them as well. So this is really important, why it's important, to make sure organizations have the right strategy. And I've seen so many great, organizations that really has taken this approach. And the CISO is no longer seen as a cost to the organization. They're seen as a massive asset. And I think this is where we'll start seeing more of the security leaders becoming, business assets to the organization because they're able to do that transition. So I think this is definitely the way forward. And we'll see a lot more discussions around, business outcomes from a security standpoint.
Well, a huge thank you for coming on here today, sharing so many fantastic insights. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to leave everyone listening with one final gift. We have a bookshelf where I ask my guests to leave a book that means something to them, or a song that they can add to our Spotify playlist. I don't mind which, but what would you like to leave us with and why?
If I could do both, because I have two things on my head. What the book side, the most awesome book, the one for me that really set off an industry trend is The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. And I think that's the foundation. And we really look back is that, again, that was all about 75 cents in an accounting error that basically ended up, following a cyber espionage through multiple networks, ultimately to Berlin and Germany, all because of 75 cents. And I think that's going back to my original kind of point that the episode is around, is that money is what makes the value a lot of times, and where you can save it and where that applies. And that book is a great read that really kind of is the foundation of many things in our industry. I think it was one of the first books that really highlighted the challenges and risks that many organizations face. From the song side, from the Spotify side of things, I went recently to an Imagine Dragons concert, and the support band was known as AJR, and one of their songs, which is known as "Weak," it's been playing in my head so many times since the concert. So for me, it's probably making a big impact to my daily routine. So AJR, and the song is called "Weak."
Fantastic. I'll get the book added straight to the Amazon wish list. And you went to a concert, you picked up a bad case of earworm, and now you've infected everybody listening around the world with the same earworm, but I'll get that added to the Spotify playlist. And for anyone listening wants to find out more information about the work that you're doing, carry on the conversation, can you just point everyone listening in the best direction to find out more information?
Absolutely. There's two places where I primarily share my resources and research. Definitely one is on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn quite easily by searching for Joseph Carson. You'll find me listed as the Ethical Hacker. And then on Twitter, you can find me as Joe_Carson. Those are probably the two easiest places to get me, and that's where I share a lot of my research and educational content. So hopefully it will be add value for you going forward in your career.
Excellent. Well, I'll add both those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. We covered so much there, from the key cybersecurity metrics, the most critical assets and systems that need to be protected, how to identify them, and also a cybersecurity program that supports the strategic goals of the business. So much gold in there, and you even had time to leave us with a cracking book and a song that I'm going to be checking out immediately after we finish recording here. But more than anything, just thanks for sharing your story today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, what an enlightening conversation. And thanks so much to Joseph for coming on and sharing his wisdom on aligning cybersecurity with business metrics, because I think it's clear that the success of any cybersecurity program doesn't solely lie in technical victories. It must resonate with the business's core goals. And as we've learned today, identifying what to protect and understand how to balance metrics are essential steps in becoming true business enablers. So a big thank you to Joseph once again. And for everyone listening, I'd love for you to continue this conversation and join me on this journey of demystifying complex technologies and aligning them with real-world solutions. And if anything struck a chord with you today, if you thought we missed something, maybe you thought we got something wrong, maybe you've got a question, maybe you want to come on the show, as always. Social channels, how to work with me, all that other stuff, and access to 2,500 interviews is over at my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it for today, so just a big thank you to each and every one of you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.